Hi, my name is Chris, aka The Philosopher's Games, or TPhGames as my little games channel here is called, and today I want to talk about the Battlefield 6 open beta that we could play last weekend and also this weekend. I think the Battlefield series is an interesting game series, and also Battlefield 6 is an interesting game. From a more analytical side of things, I would say it is basically impossible to truly balance the Battlefield experience. So as a result, it is always kind of a balance act. On one side, controlling the chaos, and on the other side, let the chaos unfold. At the end, though, it is almost impossible to hit the perfect balance. So the question is always, how close did the current Battlefield iteration get to hit that balance? So far, it seems to me that Battlefield 6 might have hit the balance quite well, though it still needs some adjustments, of course. After the last beta weekend, I thought a lot about the question, but why is Battlefield so difficult to balance? What makes it so special or unusual compared to other shooter series like Call of Duty? Battlefield was always a very asymmetric game. The experience of playing a soldier, infantry, like a medic or an assault or whatever, on the map taking objectives, shooting at people is very different from when you play, let's say, a tank. And that is again very different from when you play a helicopter. Even these small segments of the games are completely different already. And if you look at these segments or play styles or whatever you want to call them on themselves, they also are very different. Like a recon sniper plays very different from a medic, and also a tank plays very different from, like, I don't know, if you drive around with a jeep, and a helicopter plays very different compared to a jet, and so on. So we have asymmetric elements inside of asymmetric elements, and then put this on a 64 player server with a massive map and destruction, and you have the perfect recipe for chaos. And then on top of everything else, you have different game modes that are played with different amount of players on maps that are suddenly different in size than on the classic conquest mode. And this is basically Battlefield in a nutshell. And I think this element makes it pretty clear why it is so difficult for Battlefield to hit this balance, and why Battlefield is always chaotic. And we didn't even talk about other details like matchmaking, like you join a server and you can choose whatever class you want, for example. It's not like you are a pre-made 32 player team and at the beginning you select, okay, we need 5 recons, we need maybe 10 medics, we need some engineers and some assault people. No, that's not how it works. It is just completely random and people do whatever they want, which adds to the chaos further. But why exactly is too much chaos bad? Because in most video games, especially in the competitive ones or somewhat competitive ones, pure chaos is not fun. Players want to be in control, and players want that the stuff that is happening is kind of predictable. Just imagine there would be a weapon that has a very generous hitbox. So basically, if you click on shoot, you most likely hit your enemy. And what it does is it has a 50% chance to instantly kill your opponent and a 50% chance to do nothing. As a result, every kill basically becomes a coin flip. How much fun would it be to play a weapon like this on the long run? I could imagine maybe in a short amount of time you might get some fun out of it, but just imagine you make a very good play, outmaneuver your opponents, flank them or whatever, and then you won't get rewarded for it, get your kill, complete your play, but you lose a coin flip at the end and nothing happens and you die instead. It's frustrating. Of course, adding a bit of randomness or chaos can make things more fun because you spice things up, make situations more tense or bring you into more trouble than you need to be, and potentially have to kind of manage the randomness and kind of find a way to still win at the end. But if everything is too random, then the player feels that he has no impact on the game. Further, there's also the component of learning, getting better at the game. In an encounter with another player in, let's say, Battlefield, both equally experienced in the game? Is it not also a coin flip who wins? Even though this is in theory also a coin flip, it feels much better because, you know, with a bit more practice, experience, with better aim, a better approach or whatever, I could have won that encounter if I just did that. If the game gives you tools at your hand to kind of become better and kind of learn these tools to use better than your opponents, you can have personal progression. And that's a lot of fun and can be very rewarding. I think if you hear my descriptions here of these problems, which I try to keep very general, you know, well, that sounds familiar. It sounds pretty much like Battlefield. And Battlefield has a lot of this. Always. I think if you play Battlefield, even if you are a more experienced player, you sometimes get into the situation where you are kind of trapped in a death loop. You spawn, tank comes around the corner, you die. You spawn again, somebody's behind you. You die again instantly. You spawn again somewhere else. Oh no, explosion, building collapses above you, which is pretty cool that this can happen, to be honest, but you die again, and so on. So this can be very frustrating and annoying. So the question is always, how does Battlefield kind of try to give control to the player to reduce the chaos in their chaotic game? And that is not easy. For example, some players would say, letting players select the exact location where you spawn, or give you a selection of potential spawn points around a flag in the conquest mode, for example, would definitely reduce the chaos. But it kind of would just shift things around. When you die, you usually know where the enemies are. So you would spawn behind them and kill them from behind. So what you do is basically switching the problem of getting shot from behind around. Just in your advantage this time. In this case, for the capturing opponents, it would feel very unrewarding to always get shot from behind in this case. And for Battlefield to work, it needs to be kind of rewarding to capture these flags for the attacker, because otherwise it is not fun doing so. And then the game stagnates pretty fast. And we see this in the past Battlefield iterations, but also in Battlefield 6 as well. Nothing has really changed there, and it feels sometimes very frustrating as defender. But of course, the attacker needs to know, okay, we killed everybody around the flag, we are capturing, but they will respawn at some point. Where will they respawn? It can't be too random for them, so they know the defenders spawn outside and have to push into the direction of the flag. So the attacker kind of becomes the defender at that point, and the defenders the attackers, if that makes sense. And this gives somewhat control to the attacking player. Can feel very frustrating for the defenders though. But for this game mode, Conquest, to work, taking flags must feel very rewarding. And it must be possible. And of course Battlefield does other things to kind of make their game mode and their game work. That is, for example, a focus on objectives. So for Battlefield to win a map, you have to focus on objectives. You can have 100 kills and 0 deaths, but if you never take an objective, you still lose at the end. Still, it can feel very frustrating playing objectives, especially if you have players in the opponent's team that focus on getting killed. So you get, I don't know, sniped all the time. You still get tons of objectives and make good points, and you win at the end, but it doesn't feel very fun because you just consistently got sniped from some dark corners of the map. And this problem Battlefield in of itself and also Battlefield 6 can't solve. It's impossible. It's simply part of the Battlefield DNA. Playing objectives versus player who go for kills always feels frustrating, even if you win at the end. But besides this problem, Battlefield 6 and also the other Battlefields in the past did a lot of things to give some control to the player. For example, in the interview, Vincent Pella said something very interesting when he talked about the destructibility in the game, which is, in my opinion, one of the most prominent core features of the current Battlefield games we got in the past since Bad Company.
Things will be destroyed in a familiar way that people can learn, because it's not about randomness. It's about, like being able to replicate an experience. But at the same time, every map we've played, at the end of the day, the destruction has been different. At the end of that map, it's always been a different turnout than the previous game, so there's so many different ways that people do it, depending on where your team is posted up or what they're playing, what your team is doing. So like it's predictable, but also chaotic. Like it's like this great balance that the team has found. It's magical.
So for the destructibility in the game, there needs to be predictability for the player, how things can be destroyed and what this destruction then leads to. For example, I can access the first floor over the rubble when I destroy this specific wall. So the destruction is less about creating a chaotic state on the map, but changing how the level is built. So a wall becomes a gameplay element. The floor in a building can now be destroyed and you can get one level down and surprise your enemies from above. And from this point on, this house where you fight for a flag or something plays completely different when this destruction occurs. It changes the level. And that is very interesting, but also controllable. Even though it seems chaotic and creates chaotic moments, it is, if you know the map, the buildings and the destruction well enough, predictable for you. I think what, for example, Bad Company 2, my favorite Battlefield, did very well was implementing destruction so well and that you could use it for many plays and possibilities in the game. It was not about simulating perfect destruction, it was about giving you elements to play with around and changing how a level is played. And since you could destroy so much in Bad Company, it was a huge toolbox you got. For example, I always felt like that in Battlefield 3 they dialed it back a bit too much and it was often too much of a more cosmetic element to create immersion. I think in Battlefield 4 they did it much better then, and 3 and 4 seem to be kind of the blueprint for Battlefield 6. And interestingly, I think 6 again did also a pretty decent job with the destruction overall. I'm quite happy with it. You can't destroy everything and there are definitely limitations to what you can destroy, but seeing it as a predictable element and as a tool that you got, it works quite well for the most part, I would say. And of course, it has an impact on how the level is played after you destroy something. Though sometimes you encounter elements or walls or whatever that you can't destroy and just wonder, okay, why is this now indestructible? It might have balancing reasons important for the map or whatever, but still, sometimes it feels a bit strange and you have to kind of learn where you can destroy things or not. However, you can destroy a lot of things. It's not like trial and error or something. In the important location, there's always things to destroy. This brings us also to the next point, which is very important, and in my opinion, Battlefield dropped the ball on this a lot in the past, unfortunately, that is map design. In a classic Conquest match, you have 64 players on the server, so 32 players on each team, and that's a lot. The more players you have, the less of an impact you feel you have as an individual player on the match itself. Especially if all 64 players would fight around 1 point. So in a Conquest match you need a lot of points because that will lead to a team splitting up to different points. If you hold, let's say, 4 points or try to hold 4 points and all of them would be contested, in a theoretical situation you would have 8 players at each point plus 8 enemies at each point. This is of course never the case in Battlefield, but you definitely see that 8 versus 8 is easier to balance on a location than 32 versus 32 at one location. And if we think back, for example, to Battlefield 2, we had these massive maps and points were spread out a lot. And this led to that getting reinforcements from A to B, because the spawn system was also different. You could only spawn on a squad leader, not on every squad member. This made attacking some points a very time-consuming thing at times and could be very frustrating, because if you had no vehicle, you had to walk there for like 2 minutes because the maps were so large, and then you just randomly died to a sniper sitting in, I don't know, a distant mountain or something. As you can imagine, that could be very frustrating, especially if you consider that back in the day the spawn system was still different and you could only spawn on the squad leader, not on each member. So that made things also quite complicated. As a result, in most iterations that came after that, points were closer to each other again and not as spread out as in Battlefield 2, with some exceptions here and there. Sometimes you want to have a vehicle map with a lot of vehicle combat, and in these cases you need a lot of space, and that makes sense. However, in Battlefield 6, even on the biggest map we have with the most vehicles, which was the snowy Tajikistan map, which name I forgot, and on this map things were also pretty close, and of course, if you have close points, you have a lot of action. So the frequency when something happens, when a lot of actions and fighting happens, is very high on all of these Battlefield 6 maps we have seen before. It's of course a classic in these urban maps where you are in a city and you have all these close quarter combat situations all the time. So there the pacing is already high when it comes to action. But even on the a bit wider spread map, it was a pretty high pacing and points were very close to each other. However, you have to always consider what is the map good for and what not. The Tajikistan map was definitely good for vehicle combat for sure, but it could be a nightmare if you just want to play as a soldier and running around all the time, because it was like a camper fest often. So the amount of vehicles and seats in these vehicles is very limited. Not everyone can be in a vehicle. As a result, it can be a very frustrating map after some time. And also what does not help, what I definitely notice that worries me a little bit, that due to the asymmetric nature of Battlefield maps, that one side gets too much of an advantage by simply being on that side. Like it was always the case that on locations some side might have an edge depending on if they are on the west side or on the east side, so on the left or on the right. But if this advantage is too big, the map can feel imbalanced. For example, on the Tajikistan map in the Battlefield 6 beta, I noticed that if you take a tank from the east side, from the east team, over to C and station it there, you have such a powerful position that it's really difficult for the west side to kind of do something against that. And in contrast, it felt like the west side had so much trouble dealing with this, so that they had a flat out disadvantage. And also I think they don't have a position like this on the map that is so strong in comparison. So here the map definitely felt a bit imbalanced actually. And I also noticed some of these advantages on the other maps. How big they truly are we will see as soon as people learn how to play these maps and get better at the game. But currently, like in the beta, those little advantages felt very strong once you realize they are there. And map design problems was also something that was very prominent in Battlefield 2042, which I personally also liked. However, most maps definitely needed a rework, and they did a lot of map reworks in that game. Think of Kaleidoscope. Overall, though, I have to admit I had fun on those maps in Battlefield 6. At the beginning, I really hated the Tajikistan map, to be honest. But if you see it as a vehicle map and get the vehicle a lot, then the map suddenly becomes a lot more interesting and fun to play. Still, I get the point though that not everybody can have a vehicle, and as a result there will always be people who might absolutely despise this map. I think on the Tajikistan map there is like a place missing, or those places are a bit scarce, where you have infantry combat and vehicles are not that important. While on the city/urban maps, Cairo and I think Iberian Offensive was the other name, on those maps you have places that can't be entered with a vehicle, so you kind of have to focus on specific other locations where your vehicle might work better, and those other locations you have to attack as infantry. As a result, you have infantry combat and you have a bit of vehicle stuff going on as well. On top of that, in every dark corner and balcony or whatever, there can be a rocket launcher guy, so that makes it very tough for the vehicle people to play these maps, and as a result you have to be very careful where you go and what you do there on these maps, but makes it also more interesting, I think. Here I felt like at least the balance between infantry and vehicles was much better. Of course, there is an imbalance in the DNA of this concept of having vehicles, because they are not always available. When you destroy a vehicle, it takes time for it to respawn. I really like that you can now see in the UI when it respawns. Further, you also might lose a base, and sometimes a certain vehicle spawn is tied to having a base captured. If it's gone, you don't have access to the vehicle, and the enemy might get access to it. So this is also something to always consider in this context. Due to this, the vehicle must be a powerful thing on the map. It can't be too powerful, but it must be quite powerful. In contrast, the infantry, a soldier, can be instantly revived by a medic, or with some delay also by a squad mate, and brought back to the game. And when you can't get revived, you are so far behind enemy lines that you would have died at some point anyway. So in this regard, that's just such a powerful mechanic if you think about it. If you knock out a tank, he's gone for like 2 minutes, and there's nothing anybody can do about it, except try avoiding getting the tank being blown up so you can repair it, but that's basically the only option. For infantry, getting revived by medics is just so strong in comparison. As a result, also deaths don't count that much in this game, because you can always get revived and be instantly back without any problems or disadvantages. Also, I just want to point out that the ability of other people when reviving to dragging people around a little bit and bring to safety is just such a cool and fantastic feature. I think it was decades ago in a Battlefield 2 mod already, but it never really made it to the mainline Battlefield games. Glad that it now is there in Battlefield 6. It's really a very nice addition. And also this reviving mechanic brings so much control back to the player, because with multiple people you can knock out potentially all the enemies and then revive everybody who also was taken down in the process, in an ideal scenario of course. And also the mentioned vehicles are control for players, at least who are in them. They are more powerful than a classic soldier, and they have a presence on the map, and it's tougher to be destroyed because they are tanky, can take some hits here and there, have a lot of firepower. At the same time, it can create a lot of chaos, but it also gives a lot of control. It's an interesting game design element in the game. Further, for the enemies, it's also an objective to destroy the tank as fast as possible. That's also like a mini objective for players that also generates control, you know. People suddenly agree on, without verbal communication, that they have to do something against this tank and potentially have to take the engineer class and shoot rockets at it, or use C4, or get another tank here, whatever measures they think are fitting for the situation, but suddenly they work together, and this removes chaos, interestingly. And as said earlier, in this case the balance is always very important. Like if the tank is too weak, it's not big enough of a threat and people will just not use the tank. If the tank is too strong, it becomes extremely frustrating to play against it, and they have to, I don't know, do some balance adjustments here and there. So far I feel like vehicles kind of die relatively fast in Battlefield 6, which is good, but I think it's not too extreme yet. Maybe they can be a little bit stronger or a bit more tankier, but they're kind of almost there in my opinion. And in contrast, Battlefield 2042 was very extreme when it comes to this, because there you had so much anti-tank power in the game that tanks in of themselves had to be really powerful to kind of work on these maps. And as a result, if a team failed to deal with a tank, it became really a force to reckon with. But that, I guess, was always the case. Still, there you needed to kind of know what to do, where to go, because it was always very dangerous with so much anti-tank power on every soldier in the game, or almost every soldier in the game. So we had to be very careful there. When it comes to helicopters and jets, I'm not really a pilot, so I have not played them much, and I'm also not good with those, so my expertise is basically non-existent. As a result, I can't say much about it. Another aspect that has impact on the chaos is definitely also the map size. We discussed this earlier. Some people said the maps are too small, and I would say, yeah, they're definitely on the smaller scale. We know that there will be Operation Firestorm later as map available in the full release, which is a very big Battlefield 3, and it was also, I think, in Battlefield 4 map. So that will be definitely on the larger size if they kind of don't make drastic changes to it. Further, there's also another map where the developer said that it will be bigger than Operation Firestorm. So there are these big maps, but they are not in the beta. Also, while recording this, the second open beta weekend just started, and I had a chance to jump in and play 2 rounds on the new map called Empire State, and it's an infantry only map, which is also very small. So it seems like for the open beta they definitely want to focus more on the infantry side of things and not on the all-out vehicle combat stuff, which I can understand. I think also in a lot of interviews they mentioned that they kind of rebuild the gunplay of the game quite a bit, and it definitely feels a bit different to classic Battlefields, but also similar. For my taste it feels actually really good, and I think they did a good job there, but I think tastes might vary here a bit. Also, just for completeness sake, the sound design in the game is also pretty good, as basically in all modern Battlefield games never really was a big issue in my opinion. But now we have to slowly come to a conclusion. Like, we talked a lot about the chaos, it is definitely in the game, and they built in a lot of systems to give control to the player to balance it out. The spawn system, of course, spawning on squad mates, reviving squad mates, which is possible for every class, but it's a bit slow if you are not a medic. Also, the spawn beacon, which is currently on the recon, even on the second beta weekend, but it will be moved to the assault as far as I'm aware, which is a better idea because the assault rushes 2 points and takes those. He does not play as passive as a recon sometimes can play, so I think it would complement his kit a little bit better, and it's a really strong tool, to be honest, which can also reduce the randomness and chaos again a bit, simply because you can now select very precisely where you want to spawn, and usually you place those in very hidden places, so to say. Further, there are also tons of game modes available in the game, so if you don't like 64-player Conquest, you can reduce this in size in the full release at least, or play another game mode like King of the Hill, Domination, which is only 16 players, and suddenly without vehicles and 16 players in much smaller maps, things become more manageable and less chaotic, so some people might enjoy those. But for those to work, you need good gunplay, interesting weapons and interesting classes. And I think they're onto something here, and that is definitely, I think, good news to just deliver a solid experience. Further, there will be a single player campaign, which I have not looked into anything, so can't tell you anything about it, but if it's good, then this is a really good recipe for a strong Battlefield entry in my opinion. The only thing that really worries me a bit are the maps, to be fair, because they're not bad, the maps we have seen in the open beta yet, but they're also not mind-blowingly good. And usually you want to show off the stronger maps on an open beta like this, as they did also in the past, with some exceptions here and there for sure. But in 2042, I think the release version, Orbital was also one of the stronger maps they had, and still a map I really like. It needed some tweaks later, but I think overall the map was, from its design idea, pretty solid, even on release. Sure, some stuff could have been improved, but overall it was a map I really liked. And it was also the open beta map for 2042. As mentioned earlier in the video, they definitely dropped the ball on map design quite a few times, even before Battlefield 2042, and as a result, my expectation is not the most positive on what to come if these are the best maps they currently have. But I could be wrong here, and it might wait with the better maps, which might be vehicle maps, for the full release. I don't know, but it would be great to see at least one map where I say, wow, that's an awesome map. Looking forward to playing this in the full release game. Still, I think there is potential, and maybe they learn something out of this, because in Battlefield 2042 they had to rework like a lot of maps due to very negative feedback from the community. As a result, I kind of think that they should have learned their lesson to some degree, and just hope that the imbalance that I observed in the current maps from the open beta are definitely just temporary or not as strong as I think they are. What is also very noticeable is that we have like a lot of these city urban maps, which were always kind of popular, I have to admit, but they're also limiting in many ways, because they have certain lanes and passes you can only take. The map tries to kind of control where players can go and where not. In Battlefield, players usually like to find creative ways around that, and creative ways to kind of, I don't know, go and take a huge detour and attack the enemy from behind. That's classic Battlefield move, I guess. But on these maps, this becomes very difficult at times because we have so few ways to certain points on the map. Still, I guess there are enough points to do this, but I can definitely see that some players might dislike that if it's too restricting and if there are too many maps in this style. And currently in the open beta, we have like an overdose of this particular style, which does not really resonate well with a lot of Battlefield players, as far as I'm aware. Also, I'm quite curious what they will do with vehicle unlocks. Currently in the open beta we have none, but in the final release I assume we will see a few. And in Battlefield 2042 they kind of had the idea that every seat in a vehicle has something to do. I hope they also do something similar in Battlefield 6, because I like this concept. So it's not like, oh, I'm in this tank, oh, I'm unfortunately not the gunner, so I have nothing to do and can just look out of the window. It's usually not that interesting, and people then get out of the tank. It's kind of interesting to have a complete tank crew and do stuff with it, and the tank becomes more and more powerful the more people are in it. That's, I think, a cool idea and concept. Promised sometimes that tanks get too powerful this way, but still, I always like the idea of that. Performance is always kind of a coin flip with Battlefield releases. Sometimes the open beta runs really well and then the final release is complete trash, so it's hard to make any conclusions from this point to the final release, in my opinion. Still, I have to admit the performance in the open beta was really good. And I recently played Wuchang Fallen Feathers, and the performance difference is like night and day, like how much frame pacing problems and stuff I have in Wuchang versus this game, which just runs most of the time very smooth. For context, I play on PC and have a pretty decent machine, but still nice to see that it runs so well compared to some other current releases. So in this regard, I was actually impressed, I have to admit. So overall, I'm quite positive on the Battlefield 6 beta, but a bit worried about the maps. And the maps is definitely something they need to kind of tame the chaos. Good map design helps there a lot. It's one of the most important parts, and that's why it's so difficult to get this done, especially if you have the idea of designing asymmetric maps as they do in Battlefield. So there is definitely a big obstacle for this game, but maybe it can overcome it and deliver a great experience. I also think the single player might be quite important. If they deliver a good experience here, that definitely will help the game. So I hope they succeed there as well and deliver a strong entry into the Battlefield series. That would be awesome. But always keep in mind that at least on the large conquest maps, having chaos is always something that happens in the game. It's part of Battlefield's DNA. The game gives you tools to kind of give you some control back and taming the chaos, but some of the chaos remains, and this can lead to frustration and be sometimes also very annoying, especially if the map design is not up to the task. But if that is the case, only time will tell. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video and are still listening to this point after like 30 minutes, feel free to press the like button and subscribe. I would love to get these 1000 subscribers here on this channel. That would be so awesome. And leave me a comment. How did you like the Battlefield 6 open beta? What do you think of my analysis? Let me know in the comments. Would be also appreciated. Also, a huge shout out as always to all my supporters. Much appreciated. Thank you for your continuous support. And I would say, thank you people for watching, and see you next time. Goodbye.